Blog Talk Radio.
Well, here we go, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, across the country and the world. It's the Pigskin preview, and these guys have taken the ball and run with it. Mark Mancini here. Chris Rose, Baltimore Blaine, and Mark Hirsch have done a tremendous job. Not only have they built this thing in the stables, Primetime with the Stables, the Facebook page, blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports. They also have, when I'm tied up and running around either covering Clippers, Lakers, Dodgers, they have taken it and put it on Spreaker, the Knucklehead Podcast on Spreaker. That's right, the Knucklehead Podcast on Spreaker and YouTube. So they basically get it all over the place. Tune them in. They are tearing it up, and for the last 3 weeks, these guys have done wonders. Basically what they've set up in the stables is every show needs to be run the way these guys have run it. Pure, smooth, crisp. And boy, I'll tell you, when I listen to these type of shows, it makes the producing that much easier when you have a show this good. As we get these out to the listeners driving around, and as you're driving around, they will not take calls on this show. So basically, they want to make sure everybody knows who they are. Chris Rose, Mark Hirsch in Green Bay, Baltimore Blaine. So they will not take calls on here. 347-205-9631. Let me repeat that again. 347-205-9631. This is how far the podcasts have come, guys. It's not three guys sitting in the garage with string and cans. It's not pulling off to the side of the road on the 5 or 95 or 10 and opening up your laptop to listen to these guys. You can Bluetooth this show right through your car. Basically, we've taken the motto of the Los Angeles show, tune them out, tune us in. So shut your AM radio down. You can't pick up and Bluetooth this show through the cars, 347-205-9631, blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports. You can hear the downloads later on. Also on iTunes, search Mancini Sports. And again, go to their Knucklehead Podcast on Spreaker. That's the Knucklehead Podcast on Spreaker. Now that I've set the bar and everything, let me give the podium, the red carpet, and the mic. The email address will come from this guy leading the pack, Chris Rose. Chris, how are you, my friend?
I think Chris isn't in right now, but so this is Mark Hirsch. I'll take over here. Our email is knuckleheadpods@gmail.com. Knuckleheadpods@gmail.com. So we've got the slow season here. The draft is coming up. Free agency has just about died down. The news is slow, but we still have a couple of things to talk about. And I'm going to start out by mentioning something I came across yesterday that I thought was pretty interesting. I read in the papers that the Buffalo Bills, who unexplainably let go of Tyrod Taylor, are now trying to trade draft picks with the Giants to move up to number 2. The speculation is that they're after one of the quarterbacks, Mr. Rosen, and what they're offering in return is a number of draft picks for New York Giants who need a lot of help, not just one help, not just two helps. And aside from that, the Giants have also said they're not looking for their franchise quarterback out of this year's draft. What do you think about this, Baltimore Blaine?
Seems to blow my theory away that I thought that those first 3 picks were going to be all quarterbacks. And it seems like the Giants aren't really looking for a quarterback right now, or at least that's not their top priority, because now they're dropping back. And, I mean, if this goes through, and that means that there won't that the quarterback that they might have wanted, or that I thought they would have wanted, won't be there, or very possibly won't be there. So it's a smart move if you're not looking for a quarterback. You get more draft picks. You build up in other areas. The Giants need a lot of help, and yeah, if they're not looking for a quarterback, they might want to drop back and then trade and drop back again and get some more picks.
Well, that certainly seems to be what they're thinking about, and it's obvious that with the loss of Tyrod Taylor, the Bills need to do something. Chris Rose, are you with us yet? We're having a little bit of technical difficulty. Are you here, Chris Rose? Okay, we don't have Chris yet. Go ahead.
I wanted to say, Mark, that, yeah, you're right with Tyrod Taylor leaving the Bills, and that writing was on the wall during the season, with the weird benching of Tyrod and, while they were in first place. They did manage to get to the postseason for a brief time, but now Tyrod's in Cleveland, and they really are in need of a quarterback there, a franchise quarterback. So the writing was on the wall that Tyrod was going to be gone, and that and now they're going to have to go through the draft to get one.
Well, it was a puzzle to me because let's think about this. How could they possibly know they'd be able to trade up and get Rosen? There's how could you know about that? But they let Tyrod Taylor go anyway, so that was a puzzle for me. Now, another thing that's happening is, do you want to talk about the recent resignation?
Which resignation are we talking of?
Well, Harrison resigned.
Oh, Harrison's retirement? Yeah, I think Mark Mancini want to chime in on this. Harrison was a force to be reckoned with in that defense, on that defensive line and linebacker. He tried for another Super Bowl ring that didn't pan out when he was released by Pittsburgh and decided to sign with the Patriots and try to get that one more reach at glory and fell short. But he has got to go down in the annals of Pittsburgh Steeler history as one of the best in that position. He was actually, what few people realize or care about probably, is that the Ravens had Harrison very briefly before he signed with Pittsburgh. They had him in camp, and they cut him, and I guess he was a roster cut on the final cuts, and then he ended up signing with Pittsburgh, and the rest is history. He started to terrorize the Ravens for 2 times a year for his career.
You can't tell.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that you're really about him retiring, can you?
I can't tell you what.
That you're upset that he retired, because I would think that anyone in the AFC North would be glad to see that guy go.
You know what? I'm the type of guy that doesn't want to see a guy embarrass himself, and he's not the same guy. He's not that scary force for 16 games a season. However many snaps that a full-time linebacker takes. He was a part-time player. He came in, towards the end of his career, he was coming in and using spot service. He was sharing time with the other, being rotated in and out. He wasn't the guy, and so he would come in. He would make a play every now and then. So he was a shadow of himself. And so with that, I say, enjoy your retirement, enjoy the rest of your life. Hopefully, you're not going to suffer any of these injuries and these problems that retired linebackers have who played long in the league.
Well, he's a shoo-in for a Hall of Fame spot.
I'm not sure.
I don't know about that because of all the controversy. For all you millennials out there listening, right when they started started the new rule where you couldn't go helmet to helmet, a few players had a really hard time with that rule. YouTube Harrison vicious hits. It's pretty. I mean, he ended people's careers. He was a health risk. So, Mr. Hirsch, why do you think he goes into the Hall? I think he made too many writers mad.
Well, I think that's probably on my part speculation, but I'm trying to put that out there because out of all linebackers, this guy was something special. So why should he be in the Hall of Fame? And the way you described it, he was a guy that was used to playing one way, and then the rule changed. It took him a little bit of time to adjust. What do you think about his Hall of Fame chances, Mr. Baltimore Blaine?
I'm not so sure he's. I would put him in the Hall of Fame, the team Hall of Fame, but I'm not sure. I've got to look at his numbers, and also he wasn't the only guy. He shared that with Timmons at one point, and a couple of others, and he was. I don't think that he was that. For me, that force that just was, that everybody was so afraid of. I mean, he stood out on that team as one of the guys, the top guy, but one of the guys that you had to reckon with. I don't know if I compared him to Lawrence Taylor or some of the greats. I don't know if I would put him up with a Ray Lewis. If in comparison that are in the Hall of Fame or going to the Hall of Fame in Ray Lewis's case. So it would be he's worth the conversation, definitely. He's definitely in the conversation.
Well, he had a good career, and he's resigning now, and I definitely agree with you that it's better to get out when you got a chance. We're still trying to get Chris Rose back in here. We're having some phone problems there. Are you with us again, Chris? Okay, he's still trying to come in.
Chris is in and out.
He's in and out. So
he's in and out.
What's the deal with Brady and Gronk? Any ideas about that one?
Well, from
Blake?
what I'm hearing, Brady and Gronk are fine. Is Belichick and Gronk that seem to have the tension going on? Gronk hasn't talked or come to a commitment to the Patriots. He's been tweeting things that have been rubbing Belichick the wrong way, such as, Amendola signed with Miami, and he made some tweet where he capitalized certain words about being free. I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have it in front of me. Being free and have fun, with fun capitalized and free capitalized, and Belichick, from what I understand, didn't think it sent the right message, or that it was possibly even a dig at the Patriot way. Amendola, had some comments as well. But it's more friction between, because Brady has been, Brady actually put a like on that tweet, actually, too. So, there's also been talk about there's some sort of friction between Brady and Belichick with the Garofalo trade, where supposedly Belichick didn't want that to happen, and Brady went over his head to Kraft, and Kraft made it happen. And so, a lot of this is a bunch of, it's probably hyperbole. But where there is smoke, usually there's fire. There's some sort of like ember, at least. And I don't think the Patriots are as healthy, healthy as far as their locker room is concerned that we're used to.
Well, I thought this was over. I mean, earlier, a couple of weeks ago, the big buzz was all about Gronk. Was Gronk going to retire? Was Belichick going to trade Gronk? Was Gronk going to go somewhere else? And it seemed to have settled down, and that Belichick had made his choice when he traded off Cooks, and he was left with Gronk. So, Chris Rose, what's going on here?
Yeah, I don't know. It keeps dropping me. I apologize, folks, but it's funny that you mentioned that because, we talked about that on our Friday show. From now on, folks, if you guys want to reach us, it's Knucklehead Pods. That's Knucklehead with the K Pods at gmail.com. You can find us at Nuckpods, KNUCKPODS, on Twitter and on Facebook. Look in the description below, and any time that Mr. Mancini is off doing, working with famous people and leaves us bums behind, you can always find from one of those addresses there, you will find a show on Tuesday, every single Tuesday from here on out. Plus, we have some other content for you guys. So we're going to bring that Gmail and that information up again. I just wanted to kind of get that out there. Sorry about the connection there. The other shows, for this exact reason, won't be live. They will be taped, so we won't have this problem. But you're talking about the Pats.
Can we go back? Can we go back, Chris, real quick? Can we go back to the Harrison deal and get your comments, and also maybe Mark Mancini, being a Pittsburgh Steeler guy, maybe he wants to chime in on that.
Okay, I will say this about Harrison. He's a dirty dude. He scares some of the biggest people I've ever met in my life. Like, I've talked to players that say, if there was one guy that in football wouldn't have found him, you would want to meet that guy on the street. Everyone always says it's Harrison. Like, he's just a monster. And you look at those videos and things. I mean, he's 40 years old, and he is just a workout machine. He's just a focused animal. So I think he does deserve recognition as a great linebacker. He's a huge part of that Steelers franchise during, the Ben Roethlisberger, Hines Ward, Polamalu, Harrison. I think all those things go together. Porter. I think all those names go together, with good reason. I will say something else that I do respect Harrison about. He was an undrafted free agent.
Yeah.
Did not get drafted. Did not get invited to the combine. Did not have anyone want him. Just thought he was a thug and too short and too this, too that. And he has one of the longest careers a linebacker has had, in the NFL. So even though I know you're super busy, Mr. Mancini, why don't you jump in and tell us about your fellow Pittsburgh guy?
Yeah, Harrison is a long line of a lot of guys that are basically going down in history with the Steelers. I mean, the defensive fronts and linebackers and everything. I mean, over the years we've seen the Mean Joe Greens, the Ernie Holmes, the Greg Lloyds, the Kevin Greens. I mean, the list just keeps going on in Pittsburgh with their defensive running around and Carnell Lake and stuff. And, well, I'll tell you, when you think of Harrison, I mean, that's just a long list of them. And I think, like you said earlier, nobody's really feeling sorry for the Steelers and, some of the other teams in the AFC North. As, what you're seeing is teams are starting to make moves. And I know you guys are going to get into some of these other teams making moves, but as I've been doing all these crazy things and covering stuff, and never to leave you guys by the side, never. I got to see Mark Hirsch's good old boy in Green Bay at one of the Clipper games. Boy, I'll tell you, that quarterback Aaron Rodgers, he's telling everybody trust the process. I don't know if he's been hanging around Joel Embiid of the Philadelphia 76ers or something, but trust the process in Green Bay. What are we trusting in Green Bay, Mark Hirsch?
Well, I'm going to have a little segment about the quarterback stuff later in the show. But the other big thing that's up is Dez Bryant. What's up with Dez Bryant?
Yeah, I've been really hard on Dez, and it's something that I really everything today. Something that I think is important, that especially in today's society, the mental health issue and not judging people, because he had a really tough time and in the beginning of his career. And you remember that one of his first years when he was really volatile was during the strike or the holdout, whatever it was, and they weren't allowed to put security on him, and he beat up his mom, had the problem with the mall. So he's kind of come a long way. I think the best example of that is Brandon Marshall, what he's done as far as awareness for awareness of mental illness and how it's not a disease. It doesn't make you outside of society, but it is something that can be helped, and that we need to bring awareness to it. So I think he's gone to that place. But you saw that emotion, that side of him that just kind of snapped in that interview he gave when he got fired. And we'll pass it around. We'll go in reverse. We'll go to Blaine first. he walked out of the building saying, "I'm going to see you guys twice a year." And the Giants and the Redskins have come up, but was that more emotion, or do you think that was real and he had something set up? Plus, do you think Dallas did him dirty by not just releasing him like a man a long time before free agency, so he would have had a better chance to get signed and not make a spectacle out of it?
That latter point is what really it really gets me. I don't see why they held on to him. It seems like they did do him dirty. And releasing him now, where he has limited teams that are looking to sign him, as opposed to if they had let him go at the beginning of free agency, he would have had a chance to latch on to just about any team out there that he wanted to latch on to. Now, as far as the emotional, and I think it was an emotional quote or emotional comment that he made leaving and talking about seeing Dallas twice a year. Yeah, I think it was emotional. He was hurt. He was upset. As it turns out, none of the NFC East teams look like they're interested in taking him on, mainly because of cap space. You have the Giants, who are, I think, low on cap space, something like $5 million maybe under the cap, and they're trying to negotiate with Odell Beckham Jr. They got Sterling Shepard there right now, and they don't seem to have an interest in him. DC doesn't seem to have an interest in him. They have Josh Dotson, Jamison Crowder, and Paul Richardson under contract. They're about $17 million under the cap, so they have the money. But the Eagles are now at a little cap strap because of the additions they've made in the offseason, and they have Alshon Jeffrey, Nelson Aguilar, and they just signed Mike Wallace to a one-year deal. I see that their cap space is about 1.5, I think it's estimated at, second least in the league. So, and nobody's showing any signs of any interest in Dez Bryant in that division. Now, surprisingly, one team that has popped up that I said on Friday's show and made the announcement on my pedestal that don't stand a chance with Dez Bryant is the Baltimore Ravens, who may be front runners. Now, Dez Bryant's side hasn't said anything about that I know of, but there's a lot of speculation around the league that's where he could land. We'll see.
Well, it sounds like the Ravens are the speculation for almost everybody that's floating around out there, I think. But, I've never been known as a fan of the Cowboys. I'm still holding a resentment from the mid-'90s when they knocked my Packers out of the playoffs year after year after year. And I remember a game, it was a few years back, where the Packers were behind to Dallas, like 28 points going into the fourth quarter, and they ended up winning the game. And in the last 5 minutes or something, Dez Bryant had an emotional meltdown and stalked off the field and went up into the stands. I mean, so, he's always been a question mark to me. I think that's just unacceptable. That's not professional at all. And then he had the meltdown when he was at the podium about leaving the Cowboys. So I think if I was a general manager, I'd be taking that into consideration, because who needs that type of energy on their team? Having said all that, I think that you're right, Blaine, that I agree with you that the way that Dallas handled it could have been done a lot better. Chris.
Yeah, I mean, his whole thing is like, I represent the star. I'm a Dallas guy. He's from Oklahoma. I mean, he's playing for his childhood team, and just to be done dirty like that he blames. It just seems to be a reoccurring pattern with them, emotional guys that they make emotional. So it'll be interesting to see, being a Seahawks fan, the game I remember was last year when Dez was playing the Seahawks, and they weren't throwing him the ball, and he was running up and down the sidelines complaining about it, and they threw him the ball once, and he dropped it, threw it again, it bounced off his hands, finally caught the ball, ran up the sidelines, he got the ball knocked out for a fumble. That kind of summed up his season, especially after he got paid a couple of years ago. So I mean, it just kind of feels like something rough, especially America's team, America, whatever.
Yeah.
It just seems dirty. And I think the fact that he went in there willing to take a pay cut and do whatever he had to do to stay with the team, and they didn't even give him anything, is kind of a kick in the old huevos. So let me pose you guys a quick question before we get off this stuff. Okay, go ahead, Blaine.
Yeah, that's one thing that I didn't hit on as well. That bothers me too. Is you didn't even it tells you that they didn't want him because they didn't offer him a pay cut or a chance to stay with the team or say, okay, let's renegotiate this. Maybe we will revisit this. What they did was they picked up these new receivers and started to replenish the team, making it seem that it was going to be around Dez Bryant, and suddenly Dez Bryant is cut out after. Like I said before, everybody's gone. I mean, all these other teams don't have the cap room for them anymore, or have somebody that they've already signed. So to me, it's like, okay, you knew you didn't want them. Why didn't you just let them go at the beginning of the free agency?
Yeah, there is some financial reasons for that and saving some cap, but just the way the whole thing went down. And he was untradeable with the contract that Dallas had given him. But I think there was ways that they could have made something work if they wanted to, but they would rather have his personality and what they would save cap-wise more than they would him. So here's a quick hypothetical. We'll go Mr. Hirsch and then Blaine. We talked about the Giants, so let's just go on with this narrative of, he wants to play the Cowboys twice this year. The Giants are up against the cap. If you have Eli and you're going to have to rebuild anyway, what would you do if you two put your GM hats on? Get the 2 first-round picks, or get a big trade for Beckham, bring in Dez to be respectable for a year or two, and then go in full rebuild mode, or just say, hey, Beckham's the future. We're going to try and, even though he doesn't want to be here and he's problematic, we're just going to roll with Beckham and have the new guy come in and build with him. So we'll start with Mr. Hirsch, then go to Baltimore Blake.
Well, I think Dez is getting a little long in the tooth there, and I think you're right, another year or two, but I don't even know if you can count on that. So I think the Giants would be taking a real gamble to trade off Dez Bryant instead of Odell Beckham. Although, yeah, it would make a lot of sense financially if they could get Odell Beckham traded to somebody else. They would get him off the cap. They'd have room to sign some free agents if they could get some, and they're going to be needing some money for the picks they're going to get from the Bills, theoretically. So, I think it's a toss-up, and it's just one of those things. And I'm going to talk about that a little more, how hard it is to ever figure this stuff out when we talk about the quarterbacks. But I don't know. I think, what are the Giants going to rebuild with? They're going to rebuild everybody at once. I think they'd be better off keeping Odell Beckham. Blaine?
Yeah.
It's hard for me to get away from my bias here. I'm not an old BJ guy. I have a problem with men acting like children, and this is not one of my favorite players at all. Okay, but if I'm a Giant GM, and as you said, they're retooling big time. They're going to need a replacement for Eli, so they bring him back for 1 year. That's why I thought they were going to be drafting a quarterback, which it doesn't look like they are, unless it's going to be one of the second-tier quarterbacks, or whoever is left over from the first tier. If somebody slides down, if this trade goes through with Buffalo, I would say, in answer to your question, I try to keep him. He's a draw. He's going to get butts in the seats. He's going to give free publicity to this team one way or the other while you're building. Sign him to as little as you can for as short a time as you can, I would say, and start looking for a replacement.
He won't sign for. Yeah, sorry to be stop on you there. That's the other thing is he won't play for anything besides top end player money, not just receiver money, player money.
Yeah, but you also have the thing with Des Bryant. Des Bryant's probably going to sign a 1 or 2 year contract, no matter where he goes. This is going to be a year for him to prove himself. And with the limited amount of what seems to be a limited amount of teams or suitors for him, he's going to do what Mike Wallace did. And we went out of Dallas on a bad note, on a down note. And he needs to show that he can still play. He still has enough in the tank to make a difference on any team. So I would say that I wouldn't have him. I can see that if you lose Beckham and he's still out there, which he probably won't be, to sign him as a replacement. But I would try to hold on to Beckham, and if that ship looks like it's not going to come to port, then move on and maybe just go ahead and let Beckham go and get Des Bryant.
It's something that we're going to talk about in the next 2 segments. As Mark Hirsch alluded to, whichever one is the better idea also depends on how well you execute whatever you get for them. So if they get 2 first rounds in the 3rd round, that's not going to happen. But just being, running a hypothetical, those numbers mean nothing if you pick 3 duds. You know what
Cleveland.
I mean? Yeah, ask Cleveland. and we're gonna both of you guys have kind of a special tonight. So a special segment. So we're gonna actually start with you, Blaine, before we go into Mr. Hirsch, since we're on that subject of your GM has really hit well in the off season. So before we get into, we have a big special coming on quarterbacks tonight. Make sure you guys write us for upcoming shows. We all try to write you guys back and find emails that we can look into and research to give you the best answers possible, as well as, we're going to have some fun contests and things once the season starts. That's knuckleheadpods@gmail.com, knuckleheadpods@gmail.com. All the info is in the description below, and that's where you'll find us for other shows, as well as if our Tuesdays have to be changed. They'll be changed over to that. So this year we're prepared for it. So once again, Blaine, talking about, the Ravens, one of the things the Ravens have really been known for.
One more thing.
Yes, sir.
about OBJ. Who's got the money? Maybe we'll see him over in Cleveland. And with that, I'll put it back to you, Blaine.
Well, what I said on the Friday show, my pick for him to go to, and nobody's talking about, is why not the Texans? Cap money is, but I mean that would be a great team for him to land with. There was a young quarterback, young up and coming quarterback.
Well, Cleveland is the team that's got the dollars stacked up, so that's why I was bringing that up, maybe as a little bit of a joke, but wouldn't surprise me. I mean, Cleveland's got enough salary cap room to get anybody they want.
They just overpaid for a couple. For Landry and stuff, so they got that's probably the only position they don't need help at.
The problem with Cleveland also is whether or not a player wants to go to Cleveland. That's a free agent. I mean, someone in the situation with Des Bryant. Are you talking about Odell Beckham Jr.?
I'm talking about Odell. We're talking about Odell.
I was talking
Odell,
about
okay.
Odell. I mean, he's the guy that wants the big money.
Yeah, well, you can trade him there, but I don't know if he really wants to play for Cleveland.
Yeah, anyone
Cleveland
that takes that trade will say, "Hey, are you willing to structure an extension before we agree to this trade? Are you willing to stay here after? Right. Can you sign an extension?" So that's a good point, guys.
Yeah, Cleveland has a lot to prove. They're on a prove it to me contract, so to speak, with the league. Now that they've made these moves. Like I've been saying all off season, you're just sitting there in your chair with your pizza and your beer, and you're going, okay, when does the shoe drop now? When is it? When is the dramatic part hit? How are they going to screw this up? Because they seem to do it every time. So we'll see what happens in the draft. They got 2 first-round draft picks, and we'll see how they handle those.
Well, they got Evan Wolf now. Ron Wolf's son is their assistant general manager.
True.
So it wouldn't surprise me if they started going on the rise. But
yeah, but
know,
you got an owner.
That's all future speculation. What's been going on with the Ravens during this offseason?
Yeah, I was going to say you got an owner there that's been known to cut heads for no reason. So he's a little sporadic. So, I mean, yeah, they've got the right people in place in the front office. But the Ravens, in their offseason, they've signed Michael Crabtree. Like I stated before, some talk of the Ravens going, and it seems like they're the most aggressive going after Des Bryant. That move for me, I'm not. For 1 year, I could go with that. I'm really afraid of that locker room with Des Bryant, Michael Crabtree, and they're together. Two strong personalities, both not Harbaugh type guys. Harbaugh likes a locker room he has control over, from what I understand. And those two guys in that locker room would worry me, especially when Joe Flacco's trying to be the leader of the team. Talk about personality differences, two extreme opposite ends of leadership. So yeah, also that would make the Ravens probably the slowest starting receiving tandem in the league, because neither one of those guys are speedsters. They do have speedsters on the team with Smokey Brown that they added in the offseason for a 1 year, $5 million contract. And they also have Chris Moore still on the team, who's got speed. Now they're looking to get a tight end. They need to get a tight end. So, we're looking it looks like it might not happen until either the draft or after the draft, when, the June 1st cuts and other cuts are happen on other teams. Another player will be released, that they will probably get that tight end. I would say that they're looking in the draft definitely very hard for a tight end, a pass-catching tight end. Another receiver or two. And, I mean, that's my wish list.
Who's to say they're going to have both Des Bryant and Michael Crabtree on the roster at the same time? There's a rumor going around that they're going to go and, get the doctor to fail Crabtree on his physical.
You're going to retroactively fail the second receiver because someone better came on the market. That's how the Raven doctors do.
Folks, this too shall pass. Just milk it. Just go ahead and milk it for all you can.
That was so shady. That was so shady what they did to that
There's
kid.
nothing shady about it. It's business above board. I explained it to you. You didn't want to accept it. You just didn't want to accept it. All right.
Because you have no facts. You're basing it on homerism.
Neither do you.
I know it when I see it. I know it when I see it.
Right.
So hey, I'm gonna hit you with a couple of lightning questions, and I'll pass it over to Hirsch, and we're gonna talk about. Hirsch can kind of get into a conversation about Flacco and the backup, and that'll lead into Mrs. Hirsch's special segment that we're going to talk about quarterbacks. We wanted to get into on Friday. Hirsch is in and out of the shows last week due to health and schedule. So now that we finally got him locked down, we're going to give him a chance to just go off on one of his favorite subjects, which is the QBs and QB development. So real quick, I'm looking at this, some writer gave us, the arbitrary stuff of grades and points and lists that come out in the off season all the time. I want to talk to you about a couple of moves they made, and then give me a quick answer. Mr. Hirsch, if you want to jump in, just go ahead and jump in, and after that we'll start talking some Flacco. So how do you feel that they let Brandon Carr go?
They didn't let Brandon Carr go. They re-signed him.
I'm sorry, they reversed that. They picked up his option. I'm looking at the list below. Yeah, picking up his option. Because I kind of feel like he was a complete bust. So how do you feel about that?
No, as a matter of fact, I'm gonna push back a little bit. He was a steady force that they wanted him to be in that defensive backfield. You got to remember that the Ravens have had tremendous injury tallies over the last 5 years in that secondary, and it's weakened the secondary. And Brandon Carr was pressed into a position of as a starter because of what happened to Tavon Young in the in the preseason. You had Jimmy Smith go down as he usually does, towards the end of the season, and so Brandon Carr was a steady. He studied that defensive backfield, but he's not that guy that can cover these speedy receivers. He is a physical defensive back who can jam you at the line of scrimmage, but they get by you, and as Antonio Brown, but Antonio Brown does this to everybody, just embarrassed them, and a couple of other receivers embarrassed them. But overall, over a 16-game picture, he was pretty solid.
Well, because of the delays in making this happen and the rest of it, I'm sort of viewing this as like there's no one else out there type of deal, that they would have been open to getting somebody else, but no one's there, so they, sign their boy again.
Well, they actually signed him very before the free agency opened. So they were pretty much he was in their plans not resign him, but to exercise the option. They had him. They wanted him all along. He's also a steady presence in that locker room for the younger players. So they wanted him when they got him from Dallas. I mean, when he came out of Dallas as a free agent, he was a target, and he's one of the Ravens' favorites, the office and coaches' favorites there. Yeah,
well, what I meant by that is he got he had a couple good years and then Dallas picked him up for way too much money, and he was considered a bust. And then the Baltimore picked him up for way too much money, in my opinion. And then, as opposed to scrapping the project, they decided just to go back there for whatever reason. So I don't like the move, but I definitely respect your opinion on that. And you're the Baltimore guy, so I will always defer to you with Baltimore.
I want to just point out something that he's not the guy. They put him as part of a group. They want him to be a piece in the puzzle, not the main piece. You got, like I said, Steve Smith and Jimmy Smith and Tavon Young,
Humphrey,
and Marlon Humphrey. Those guys are the guys. Those are the future. And then you have some other backs. They let go of Ladarius Webb on the off season. But those guys are the guys and he's part of the supporting cast. He's there for depth, really. And it just
lightning
turns out
round
that he
is
was
turning
pressed
into a slow rolling thunder round. There's definitely nothing lightning about that. Well, what is it with you guys trying to hit? Speaking of lightning, catch lightning in the bottle twice and going after all these veteran receivers. Do you think you guys are going to catch another Steve Smith, or it's kind of
that's the Ozzie way.
Pattern that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess so.
I mean, you start back with Derek Mason.
And yeah, that's true.
Derek Mason, Lee Evans, Anquan Bolden, Steve Smith, Jeremy Maclin, Mike Wallace. I mean, it's a pattern. That's what Ozzie likes to grab. See, Ozzie has his philosophy of free agency is the guys that are attracted to him are the guys who have proven themselves, who maybe still have something left to give, and he milks them for the rest of what they have. And the other thing is that he doesn't like to give up comp picks, so he goes with the comp formula. And if this signing isn't going to cost him a comp pick or the chance of getting a comp pick, he's very interested in it. Yeah, but you also have to admit, Ozzie Smith, who is probably going to be, or Ozzie Smith. Ozzie Newsome.
the shortstop for the Cardinals in the 80s.
Yeah, the one that does the
Ozzie Newsome is going to be one of the few people who's probably going to go into the Hall of Fame as an executive as well as a player. But the one position he has missed on over and over and over again, you have to admit, is wide receivers in the top rounds.
Yes. Most of Ozzie Smith. Most of Ozzie Newsome's picks have been defensive players and defensive players basically. And he's
but what do you remember? I have a whole list of guys that you guys have that failed. There's a kid on the team right now who's a first rounder. What's his name?
Yeah,
He had like 2 balls a year. Yeah, you guys got a few of those. So real quick,
go
ahead. I was going to say, as you're talking about the receivers and things, why don't you end it with a little bit about Flacco and where you think you guys are as far as necessity for a backup, and then we'll pass it over to Mr. Hirsch and let him get his QB segment started.
Okay, Flacco's the guy. You know, they signed RG3 to a 1-year contract, and for 1 year, $1 million or something like that. And we'll see if he makes the cut out of camp. But if he does, he's the backup. But Flacco's the guy, and Flacco has been. I'm not going to make excuses for him because I have defenses for Flacco and I have criticism for Flacco, and I've done it on this show and some other shows over and over again. You have to look at the fact that Flacco, when you're evaluating Flacco in the course of his career, how many offensive coordinators has he gone through? How many regime changes has he gone through as far as different systems that he had to change? He hasn't had a consistent coordinator. He's had injuries over the last few years that have affected his play. If you look at the second half versus the first half of last year, that's telling. He had the back problem at the beginning of the season last season, and the second half of the season he looked like Joe from the playoffs. The problem is that he had a lot of passes dropped, which also makes it look like Flacco's completion percentage is very bad, but he's not as bad as it looks. As far as getting into the postseason, there's nobody else I want on the in my arsenal of quarterbacks. There's a handful, and Flacco is right up there with them. I believe Flacco has the second amount of wins in the last 8 years, or last 9 years or so, 10 years, something like that, of postseason wins behind Tom Brady. And people, go ahead.
Yeah, Joe Flacco. I think he's your guy, but I think it's about time for them to start bringing somebody else in there. You're talking about 10 seasons, the last 10 seasons, and how long is he going to last? And
I agree.
That's something I want to talk about a little as soon as we're done talking about Joe Flacco. But going back to what you were saying about your coaches there, picking the guys that have a little juice left and trying to move forward and going big in free agency and all that. You know, I look at this the same way I would look at it if I was wanting to get married again. You know, who do I want? Do I want Mrs. Right, or do I want Mrs. Right now? And it seems to me like the Ravens are and a lot of other teams too, are trying to make something happen immediately by trying to do some magic horse trading and all this kind of stuff. And it works to a certain extent, but, you know, what are they doing to build the team? Any comments, Blaine?
Well, when you look at that formula, it's got them 2 Super Bowl rings. So, you know, that's not if you're looking at it from a wife's perspective, you know, you look at you have a certain type and that you feel comfortable with. Do you want the party girl, or do you want the conservative mother, or you know, type? You know, I mean, it's a lot of factors that could be fed into that.
All right, so that's a bad analogy there. I'll cop to that. But the thing is, what have the Ravens done lately?
We're still talking about football, right?
Yeah. The Ravens lately haven't been doing very well, and they've missed the playoffs. For the last 5 years, and barely. I mean, and the thing is, it isn't because of the offense necessarily that the Ravens have lost. The last 2 years, it's been the defense has let them down at the end. So let's watch that. I mean, as I said, you go back to what was it, the 2013 season, and in the postseason, Flacco has two, and the offense have two 14-point leads over the New England Patriots. The defense just let them get away. Just gave it back. So it's not fair to really crucify this offense. Yes, right now they need weapons, and that's what Ozzy's doing in his last year as GM before going into the scouting department. But that's kind of skewed. That vision that is the offense, and that, all the struggles on the offense. Is that it's been a balanced team. We're used to this Ravens team having a shutdown defense, lights out defense, and they haven't had that for some years. They didn't have that in the 2012 Super Bowl. That was Flacco and the offense that won that Super Bowl. Oh, and special teams.
Well,
Justin Tucker.
Yeah. So, my point is, and I'm going to segue into what I wanted to open up on the quarterback issue, is that I don't see the Ravens necessarily rebuilding if they're going to be going for these tried and true guys like Des Bryant. In terms of quarterbacks, I would want to contrast two different ways of thinking about it. And this is just from what I've observed, is that some teams will get quarterbacks in the draft, keep them around, groom them, and bring them up into being starting quarterbacks under an already successful quarterback. Other teams, they go to the draft and they need somebody right now. I mean, they're failing. I mean, look at the Bears with Trubisky. They needed somebody. The Bears have had, 20 or 30 quarterbacks in the last 10 years? They needed a franchise quarterback, and so they go to the draft. And you contrast that to teams like the Green Bay Packers, for instance, or the New England Patriots. And when I look around the league, I'm always thinking in terms of what are these guys doing, because there's some flaws that can really hurt you when you're looking for a draftee to come in and be your franchise guy right away, starting right away, because they're not used to it yet. They haven't learned how to take their reads. They're not used to so much pressure in the pocket. They're coming out of college and into the NFL, and it's throwing them into trial by fire, and very few of them succeed. Then you have the other example, and I think the Patriots have been a good example. They had Brady waiting in the wings, and when the time was right, he steps up, and he's been doing a good job ever since. And I think they had a guy that was the guy. It was Garoppolo. And I'll never figure out why they traded him away, because I don't know who they got behind Brady now. And my only guess is that Belichick must be thinking that Brady's good for another 5 or 7 years, and I'm not so sure about that. So it brings other teams into mind, like, what are the Steelers doing? What do you think the Steelers are doing, Blade? I mean, they've got Roethlisberger, who's sitting there on bad legs. His legs are getting hurt year after year, and they don't have anybody that's really going to be able to replace him waiting in the wings. And they're not trying to get anybody, and they're not drafting. What's going on with teams like Pittsburgh?
I'm glad you made some great points there, and I'm going to be in the rare position of defending the Pittsburgh Steelers at this point. What were the Patriots like? I mean, what were the Patriots before 2000 season? Nothing. And then they had Bledsoe. Bledsoe gets hurt, they had drafted Tom Brady in the 6th round, and Tom Brady comes on, somebody that people passed for 6 rounds. Other teams, all the other teams passed over him for 6 rounds or 5 rounds, and the New England Patriots pick him up, took a flyer on him, and he's now Hall of Fame to be, but probably maybe even the greatest of all time. So my point is, it's hard to find a quarterback. Once you lose that quarterback, it's hard to find a quarterback to be a leader that can get you to the promised land. It took the Ravens forever before they came up with Flacco. We went through, what's his name? Never mind. I don't even want to go through it. The Steelers right now have Landry on their roster, who they've been trying to develop. They have another quarterback that they drafted a couple of years ago, or was it last year, that they're trying to develop. It's hard to find that guy. As you said, Mark, you made a good point, Mark, about a proven quarterback versus a quarterback that you draft that has to step in right away and prove it. It takes a lot, and that's a special guy. And so my point is that it's not easy to find these guys, and just because you think that a team isn't looking, and I'm saying that the Steelers have been looking, they just haven't found a guy. It's time for the Ravens to draft one, and I think they're going to draft one this year. Somewhere in the draft, they're going to draft a guy. They have a guy on the roster now that I thought was going to be, things need to be looked at a little bit more, in Woodrum. But it's very hard. So go ahead.
Who?
Oh, I thought somebody was trying to change.
No problem. I guess I'll jump in real quick because I'll bring this right back to Mr. Hirsch. What I would say about Steelers very quickly is that Landry is horrible. He gets like 3 pick sixes per preseason every time they get him, but they don't change him. So I'm not quite on the Steelers as much as that. I'll let Hirsch kind of go on in a second a little bit more before I get into the young versus the backups. But what I do want to pass back to Mr. Hirsch, and then because I'm not sure what happened there, we'll let Blaine keep going. Is you mentioned the Patriots, but also the Packers. Ted Thompson saying that there's always room for backup quarterbacks. Keep drafting backups. Keep developing quarterbacks. It's huge equity. It's so important. And I think some of these teams like I think Hirsch mentioned the Colts, the Bills. The Jets are just, cannot get it right. And, of course, historically bad Browns. But, getting back to you, I'll disagree a little bit on the development in a second. But I want to go back to you and let Blaine finish his topic. But, Mr. Hirsch, why don't you expand on what you were talking about with Green Bay and, how would Ted Thompson attack a Steelers team or a Ravens team or a Colts team, in your opinion?
Well, you've got some epic fails with the guys that need a quarterback now, and you've got some big success stories that you would never have figured. And I'm going to get to the Packers in a minute. I think the poster child for that is the Indianapolis Colts and their big decision about whether they're going to take Ryan Leaf or Peyton Manning. And most people would have said Leaf was the guy, but they went with Manning, and look what happened. So, it's a crapshoot when you need somebody and you need them now. Who knows what's going to happen? What is interesting about the Packers is they have had basically 2 quarterbacks in the last 20 years or even longer. And look at all the guys that came out under Brett Favre. Ty Detmer, Mark Brunell, Matt Hasselbeck, Aaron Rodgers. They have developed a way of grooming quarterbacks, and it was an anomaly in the case of Brett Favre that he played for so long, and the guys under him didn't get any chance to play because he started every game, and yet they were still able to develop probably on the practice squad or doing whatever they do and go to other teams and be pretty successful. And then finally, the last guy in the string is Aaron Rodgers, and look what he's doing. I think the Packers are trying to do the same thing again, but they're not quite there yet. Brett Hundley, who is very high rated, I think he was picked as the number 3 quarterback in his draft class. When he had to come in and his shining moment was there to really prove himself when Aaron Rodgers was out for most of the season, he didn't make it. He didn't make the grade. And the Packers are sitting there with Joe Callahan And I don't know why they kept him. They had a young kid, Taysom Hill, that ended up going to the Saints. I thought he was a better prospect from what I saw in the preseason. But obviously the Packers have taken the opposite tack. They have taken the course of trying to get young quarterbacks in when you don't need one. And that's the difference. In one situation, you're drafting a quarterback because you need a quarterback now. The Packers are drafting quarterbacks when they don't need one. And then they have time to develop them, and I think it's been proven to be something that has been working for them. Any comments?
Yeah, I'd say the Packers are blessed. The Packers are the one team that I can say that have been consistent with great starting quarterbacks. But if you look around this league at all the other teams, who else can you say is even close to that?
Patriots.
It's not
That's it.
No, not the Patriots, because the Patriots before Tom Brady were mediocre.
That's still 18 years.
Huh? Yeah,
That's still
18
18
years.
years. Yeah.
You're right.
Well,
It's still 18 years.
It's a difference of philosophy. I mean, and that's why I'm critical of the Steelers. They should have had somebody behind Roethlisberger 5 years ago. That's the way the Packers have been rolling. They've been getting guys in there, 10 years before they needed them, and gone through 3 or 4 guys that turned them, and when they turned loose Ty Detmer or Mark Brunell or Matt Hasselbeck, because Favre is still going strong, what do you think they get in return for trading them? It's a fantastic return on investment.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, and I'll go back to you, Blaine, but just to jump on that real quick, the thing that makes those two teams the same, look at what they've got. Hasselbeck, first-round pick to the Seahawks. Brunell, first-round pick to the Jags. Detmer, wherever he went. And then Belichick's done it even smarter because he got a bunch of stuff for Castle and what's the tall, lanky kid who went to Texas, Mallet, and they've had that same kind of deal where just in case we have a backup we're developing in the system, but then when it's time, if we have something else we want to move on, and look what they got when they sent their third round quarterback to the Colts last year. So I have to agree that I understand what you're saying, that they look like they're trying because they're developing the same guy, but I have to be on Mr. Hirsch's side as far as look at what success a good development program can give you as far as backing up the quarterback and giving you assets. So sorry, that was a little more long-winded than a quick one. My bad.
No. Well, I will say that maybe the Steelers waited a little too long, and they're not doing that same thing as consistently as the Patriots are now. And you look at the Patriots, the ones that they developed, and those Patriot quarterbacks, other than Garoppolo, have fizzled out. I mean, what is Matt Castle? I mean, he had one good year. What is Ryan Mallett?
That's why I was saying I couldn't understand why they let go of Garoppolo. I mean, Tom Brady's not going to last forever. They could have given him a little more money and kept him on. I mean, look at how he's doing in San Francisco. So I think that was a fail on the part of the Patriots, and I think they're going to have a hard time trying to get somebody to replace Tom Brady that's up to that standard. And
I think you're
even
right.
And people are talking now about the top quarterbacks that are going to be in the draft this year, but who knows what they're really going to do? Who knows which one of them are good? And that's why I brought up the Ryan Leaf versus Peyton Manning idea, is because, some of these guys are going into the NFL after completing their junior year, and what do you really know about them? So they go by metrics. Maybe Chris, you're the fantasy guy. What are they doing with these metrics, and how does it turn out in real life?
And that's the tough thing with the college, and because what are the metrics, right? So look at a guy like Wentz. He's small school guy. How do you put in a metric for competition or who you're throwing to? You get a guy like Tony Romo from a lower school who completes everything, but can he do that just because wherever he goes he's going to complete everything, or is it something else? Flacco, this kid from Wyoming, where the stats do jump out for me is they want him to be a developmental guy, he's got the arm strength, and they say, well, he doesn't have the receivers and things. Maybe that's what's wrong with his completion percentage. But I read something today. He did a year in junior college. I think it was his freshman or sophomore year. 49% completion rate in junior college. And those are the kind of things that jump out. And, of course, who's in the news for wanting to take him? The Browns. Those things just really blow my mind. And that's why, you look back at some of these picks and some of these, years where you have these guys up front and they fail. It's so hard to pick a quarterback. And, you look at, you mentioned Hasselbeck and Mark Brunell. That's like 6th-round picks, 5th-round picks. And Blaine, you said, what are they now? I'll tell you what they are to the team that drafted them. 6th-round pick you got a first-rounder for. That's what they are. That's what they are. I understand what you're saying, but just as a response, I understand that they didn't develop into much, but that's more the keep trying kind of methodology I think we're going to. And you look at something that I'm interested to see, and we'll talk about it in a second, and I'll give you a chance to jump back in on that comment, Blaine. But when you have these top-heavy, media-heavy first-round quarterbacks going, this is the best quarterback class, this is the best whatever, there's always a bunch of great guys that slip. And most recently, talking about 2012, top 5 picks or, top 10 picks, you have Luck, who, deserved it, just injuries, RG3, Tannehill, but in that same draft later on, you have Foles, Russell Wilson, and Kirk Cousins. So I think that's something to look at. I'm sorry, Blaine, why don't you jump back in on the development side?
No, I was just going to say, that was my point. Is again, it's hard to, and I'm just echoing with tying it back to what all three of us have said. It's hard to find a quarterback that's going to be successful in this league, and whether even if you have a system that develops them constantly. My point was that Ryan Mallett doesn't have a job right now. He spent the last 2 years backing up Joe Flacco. Matt Castle, where is he? I mean,
well,
you look
at what they have to go on. What they're doing now is they're taking their overall completion percentages, and then they're looking at their completion percentages for short passes, medium passes, and long passes, and they're trying to figure something out by looking at all those numbers. But I think Chris Rose raised an interesting point. What did they have in terms of other players on their team? What was the level of competition they were up against in whatever college conference they were in? I think that what you really need is somebody with a crystal ball or some kind of intuition gut to figure that stuff out. Who would have ever thought that Peyton Manning was going to be better than Ryan Leaf?
Yeah, and real quick, just before you go on, don't forget that these scouts, their job depends on getting it right, so they tend to go with the safer pick, especially when it's a quarterback, which can get your whole staff fired if you pick the wrong one.
Well, but some of the most spectacular success stories come from going against the grain. Look at, and I mentioned it already, I'll say it again, Peyton Manning. Then you got John Elway. I mean, he wasn't the presumptive number 1 pick for the Broncos either. So, where are these great guys coming from, and how are they getting picked out of Russell Wilson's another example. That guy certainly wasn't in the upper echelon of his class. And then you had Colin Kaepernick, who arguably had some pretty successful years with the 49ers. He was nowhere in sight either. What do you think?
Yeah, Dak Prescott, 4th round. Same thing that they're getting, that kid, I think Manziel has got everyone scared about this Mayfield kid. But if you look at it, they try to compare him to Russell Wilson, but he might fall. I know the Jets like him. But, you have these guys that fall, like Dak Prescott. How do you look at that tape and say that guy's not good? Well, he's playing in this kind of system with these kind of guys, and people just talk themselves out of it, and they just keep missing. Everyone was saying how, your Aaron Rodgers was going to go number 1, and everyone remembers him sitting in that room, falling. and then a team that doesn't need a quarterback picks him up. I think that's probably the cherry on top of this discussion is that's what someone like Ted Thompson knows and does, and that's why I think development is key. Now I'm going to throw this back to you, Mr. Hirsch, and then I'll go with Blaine since I've talked a bunch. Right now, what you've seen, especially with the way that salaries are, why don't you guys talk about there is motivation to try and hit while they're in these rookie contracts. A few years ago, the number one pick, got $60 million guaranteed, or whatever it was. Now you look at like Russell Wilson, who went to the playoff every year in his rookie contract, went to Super Bowl twice. You have Wentz that, didn't actually win the Super Bowl, but basically the team did. What the Rams are trying to do with Goff, before they have to pay that big contract, Blaine can add to this after, we get the 2 cents from Hirsch. I think that Flacco getting that huge contract hurt their roster on what they could pay some of the defense. You saw the fall off. So, Mr. Hirsch, what do you say about that when you're talking about some of these guys coming in that they need to sit? How would you decide, I want this guy to go now because that's how, the salary is going to work, or this guy is going to sit?
Well, I think that's got to be a secondary consideration, and that if somebody is really on the team, the problem is everybody's out for themselves. And they want the most money they could possibly get as fast as they can because, as everybody knows, NFL stands for not for long. And the careers are not long, and they need to get while they can. But on the other hand, sitting somebody and letting him get some experience, look at how it worked out. It's working out for Aaron Rodgers. There's nothing wrong with that. And he had an opportunity to perfect his craft, and everybody had every criticism under the sun about him. His mechanics weren't good. He, was choppy. This and that. I think it's a good sign when people are willing to work together as a team because you can restructure contracts and make it so it all comes out in the wash. And somebody that's being a backup, of course they want to play, but if you're on a team that's been developing and not just the quarterback but the rest of the team, I think it's a good bet to try to stay at home.
I believe that our listeners should chime in on this and other subjects we talked about by emailing us at knucklehead pods. That's one knucklehead. Mini pods. knuckleheadpods@gmail.com. And if you want to hit us up on Twitter, it's Nux at what is it? Nux
at Nuckpods. KNUCKPODS
at Nuckpods. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No problem.
I just screwed that up.
The easier way to find it, folks, is that the podcast you're listening to right now, all of those addresses are in the description.
There you go. But I'm a proponent of bringing a young quarterback onto the team, and then, of course, it depends. If you're a Cleveland Browns team, with the exception of this year, maybe you're gonna, or a Jets team, this year, you're gonna bring a quarterback in, and with the idea that he's going to sit and learn, and possibly prove himself in camp, and that's what it is. You bring them in, have them prove themselves in camp. Most of these decisions are made out of what goes on in camp, and and that's when you decide. Well, do we start them at the beginning of the season, or do we let them bring them in like 3 quarters into the season, or a quarter into the season, or halfway into the season, or whatever? So I don't believe in starting a young quarterback right off if you don't have to. There's no problem. I'm going to echo what Mark said. There's no problem with having them sit back with a clipboard and learn for a period of time, just like Mahomes did in Kansas City last year.
What do you think about Mahomes, Mr. Hirsch?
Well, I like the looks of Mahomes, and he's going to have to go through a learning curve like everyone else. And I think one of the tendencies of a young quarterback that doesn't have much experience with the pressure that you get in the pocket is they don't complete all their reads. And what happens is when you feel that pressure coming and you're not exactly seeing what you want out there, you're prone to either make a bad pass that's a potential interception, or an incompletion would be the better outcome, or else you take off running the ball. And Mahomes has got some good legs on him there, but he's going to be much more effective when he learns how to settle down in the pocket and go through all his reads once and maybe twice before he gets rid of the ball. I think Mahomes is going to be good.
All right, and then of these, hey Blaine, of these young quarterbacks that are coming up, do you want to pick? If you had to pick one of the five of the big guys, who do you think's gonna hit, and how important is what team that he lands on to that bet?
I'm a Baker Mayfield guy. I like as far as what I've seen, and I've seen limited amount from it to be honest. But from what I've seen, his accuracy, I like that guy. I like his demeanor. He's a bit cocky, but there's this fine line between cocky and confidence. And I like the way he carries himself. He's confident in his abilities, and so I see him being an instant success. Now, the quarterback guru that I am, being none, we'll see how that all pans out.
Well, let me tell you something. If the Jets are planning on drafting Baker Mayfield, I think that's the death knell for him. I mean, it would surprise me more than anything that could happen almost if the Jets made a decent decision about bringing in a young quarterback. I mean, look at Mark Sanchez. Look at Geno Smith. When was the last time the Jets ever brought in a draft quarterback that ended up being good and taking him anywhere? I can't remember. Chris?
Ken O'Brien, maybe? Ken O'Brien was supposed to be good. But he ended up, same thing. That 80, that class of where you have all these great quarterbacks are supposed to be great. They didn't really make it happen. I was looking at something from SB Nation about a kid, Mason Rudolph, out of Oklahoma State. He kind of looks like, from what I hear, he's the most pro-ready. And there is something to say about that. You see it in the offensive line play, in the DB play, and the quarterback play. Is these guys have these signs up. They come to the line, they look over to the left, and the coach calls the plays. They don't know. There's something about timing, not getting those delay of game calls, being able to read as the defense shifts. I mean, it's a really hard move for a lot of teams and a lot of people. And I think there's something that you saw Goff have that problem because he was in an air raid system, but.
Pressure.
The other thing you worry about, if you hit a Russell Wilson or a Dak Prescott or a Wentz even, God bless you, you got a window to try and get to the Super Bowl. But at the same time, I always think of that poor kid, Carr's older brother, when the Texans came out, their first quarterback was Carr, and he was a great quarterback, but he had set records for being hit and sacked his first few years, and it just started to, you could just see it, just started to get him gun shy. And he's on NFL Network now, and he admits, I just didn't want to get the ball anymore.
Right.
I was so
David
tired
Carr,
of getting hit. Yeah, and so there is some validity to that. I think that with the way salaries are right now, though, it's really hard to run a star-studded team with all that stuff going on. As far as the salary is concerned, because it becomes the highest paid player. And there's actually something to that. If you talk about Brady and Rodgers, and next on Friday on our Mess Around show on Knucklehead Pods on Spreaker as well as YouTube, look us for Knucklehead Pod Network, singular Knucklehead Pod Network on YouTube. You can find us. We're going to talk a little bit about Rodgers and his situation, but there's 6 or 7 quarterbacks that get paid more than Rodgers right now, and so that, while it's not a rookie contract, having the best quarterback in the league and having him not be in that top 5 is huge. So I think only time will tell as far as the contracts are concerned how that's going to go. Mr. Mancini, you've been so patient, doing a great job. why don't you tell us what's going on? Give us your opinion on your Pittsburgh Steelers and what Blaine and Hirsch said as far as differing opinions on development of a backup, and then you can go ahead and take us out.
Well, I'll tell you, as we wind down this great show, a lot of things have been going on in the stables. I don't know. I know everybody's been busy and paying attention to their shows and getting them up there as we get ready to launch some new ones. Just to let you guys know what's going on out there. All Access Los Angeles is a show that goes off on Thursdays at 5 p.m. Pacific. And those guys, Chris Taylor, Chris Camello, and Dean Ingles, have had a lot of people in there, and they've done a great number of things with that show. Jim Hill's been on there, Jeff Biggs. They've done remotes from Dodger Stadium where people have been calling in and, giving the updates. And it's a great show. It's a 1-hour show if you want to tune in on Thursdays to that one. Also, the Goddess Divination is another one. Nile is a belly dancer / engineer, and this Turkish girl has done a lot with her show. She's had psychologists on and everything talking about why men cheat, why women cheat, different things, different topics. Also, I know Blaine was interested in listening to that Friday show, Ron Sarchian and Kevin Henry. Kevin from Hawaii that does the show live out there, Ron out here. Diversity in the 21st century, and they've taken on a lot of subjects, guys, breaking down the Redskins name, breaking down a lot of things, and it's an interesting show. That's on Fridays at 4 to 4:30, so a lot of good things, but everything with the crossover from the XM 203, Sirius 214, SB Nation, American Forces Network, with those 300 stations and the 60 new ones, have given us a lot of a platform here to really open up the stables, and we're blessed and honored that guys are taking it and running with it. And I know when I get busy, sometimes you guys have taken it. And again, this Knucklehead podcast, Spreaker, and everything. I mean, it's simply amazing to get the listeners to keep that consistency going. That's what you want to do, is just keep that consistency going across the board. So a lot of things going on, and there's a music show coming in June. A guy's got Bob Seger as a guest, so that should be interesting and if you're a music buff. So a lot of good things are going. Remotes are going in on one of the shows. The LA show has a remote in Sherman Oaks, May 3rd. So a lot of things are happening across the board, and I know you guys get ready with the draft. Also, the NFL schedule will be released, so a lot of interesting stuff out there. And just to comment on what you guys talked about with the Steelers, they need a backup bag. And I got to agree with you, Chris Rose. Landry's not the answer. Pittsburgh is just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. And one of these times it's going to come back and bite them. If Big Ben goes down, they're going to have some serious problems in Pittsburgh. It's been a long time since they've had a backup. I still don't know why they didn't make a trade to get T.J. McCarron in there, somebody like that, but they sat pat. They seem to go after wide receivers and backs and stuff like that in Pittsburgh. I just don't understand why they don't draft a good backup quarterback to turn the reins over to Big Ben. And it's going to be tough if
but
they
Mark,
don't.
they have tried. They have tried.
Well, over the years, when you look
try.
at Charlie Batch and you look at some of these guys and Byron Leftwich and stuff, I don't know. I mean, there's teams that have a surplus of backups, and I don't know why they didn't, make a play on some of these guys. I mean, the Redskins lost out on, Kirk Cousins, and in turn they bring in Alex Smith, and there's guys out there, and the same thing is going to happen in Baltimore too. I think because Flacco is a great quarterback. I like Flacco a lot, but you got to bring in a backup there to turn over the reins eventually. And both these franchises, Blaine, have done nothing to go forward with it. Any thoughts?
I'm hoping that we don't end up in the same situation that your Steelers are in, but and I think that like I said during the show, that we're going to beat this draft, and I hope it pans out. But like I said, it's hard to find those guys. It's really hard to find those guys. But real quick, Mark, James Harrison, Hall of Fame or not?
Yeah, definitely. I think Hall of Fame. I think what he's done in Pittsburgh over the years is. I would put him in the Hall of Fame. I'm a little biased.
Well, here's what I want to know. Why didn't the Steelers grab McCarron?
Yeah, that's exactly what I like to know. I don't know why they didn't grab McCarron, because I liked McCarron when he was in Alabama. I liked him in Cincinnati. I don't think he got a fair shot, and he only got that shot when Dalton went down a little bit. But I think McCarron's going to do a wonder in Buffalo. And I just don't understand why they didn't pick him up in Pittsburgh. He would have fit that city great. There's certain guys that resemble that blue-collar type that can just fit cities. And I just didn't think he fit Cincinnati as much as he would fit Pittsburgh. And, who knows what he's going to do in Buffalo. When you look at Buffalo and Cleveland, it's where quarterbacks go to die.
Yeah. Well, okay, I'll amend my statement to they've tried, but they haven't tried hard enough.
Yeah, I mean, but I think if you want to be able to contend, this is a division now, in Pittsburgh and Baltimore battling it out for years, Cincinnati being inconsistent. You better look over your shoulder, because Cleveland's coming on like gangbusters now. They figured it out, and they're tired of being the redheaded stepchild kicked to the curb every year, and this is a team that means business. They're moving forward, and I think, I'm not saying Cleveland's going to win the division this year, but Cleveland's going to be heard from, and they're going to make some noise now in the AFC North, and I think you'd agree with that, Blaine, with about 3 minutes exactly left in this great show.
I'll tell you what Cleveland's got. They got Evan Wolf now, Ron Wolf's kid, who didn't get the general manager spot in Green Bay and went over to Cleveland. He's assistant general manager now, and they might start making some smart plays now. And I'm betting that we're going to see Cleveland on the rise.
I'm hoping so, but I'm still on the edge of my seat.
Yeah, we got to see them put together a few wins, and I don't mean 2 or 3. I need to see 4 or 5 in a row to really make a believer of buying into the Browns and what they're doing. But yeah, they looks like the way they've drafted and everything, it looks like they've kind of cleared past coaches and stuff, and we'll see what Jackson can do with these guys again. Another year under his belt, but I'll tell you, the clock is ticking, and the people in Cleveland are getting frustrated, including the dog pound. As we wind this great showdown, I know you guys have got the podcast going, the Knucklehead podcast on Spreaker. What days do you do that, guys? So that way the listeners will know.
We usually put up a show. Yeah, we record it on Fridays, and it's up maybe on Saturday. And it also goes up on YouTube and iTunes as well once we record a show. And then again, we're going to always be there when this spot is not available on a Tuesday. We're going to make a show on Tuesday night, and it'll probably be up sometime on Wednesday or something like that. And as we get better at doing it, maybe we'll get it up in a more timely fashion. But, yeah, we're going to keep the ball rolling, and we're definitely working toward that. And we're really hoping we're going to get some emails at our new email address, knuckleheadpods@gmail.com, because we want our listeners to tell us what they want to hear about, and we want to serve them as best we can. So thank you for the shot, Mark Mancini.
Yeah, I'm propping that one up all the time now. Consistency is the key, and keeping that show going and that's what the whole idea of the stables now is. It's come a long way from the 1 to 2 shows, and now we've branched out to quite a few, and that's what it's all about. Never to leave any show left hanging, but the way you guys have done it is basically the bar on all the other shows. Crisp, clear, taking charge of it and running with it and building it up that way rather than sit back and wait. And that's a good thing, getting out there, the consistency. As we wind down this show, we'll be back on next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 o'clock in the East. For Chris Rose, Mark Hirsch in Green Bay and Baltimore Blaine, I'm Mark Mancini. Thank you for tuning into the Pigskin Preview. Remember to drop a line on those guys, Knucklehead Podcast on Spreaker. Have a wonderful night. Thank you very much.